Hi, and welcome back to the Healthy Middle Ground podcast with me, Jen Curtis. In this episode, I want to talk to you about maintenance, the diet after the diet. Like once you get down to your goal weight, how do you then maintain it and keep the weight off? I think this is probably the number one question that I get from you guys from like social media and things like that. I wanted to do a podcast episode that really explains exactly what you need to know to keep the weight off. But I want to try and keep this episode fairly brief and concise, so that you get the main idea. And I might do another episode another time that sort of really digs into the weeds and goes through every possible like eventuality. So a lot of people worry about this topic because we have all done stupid fucking yo-yo diets, stupid fad diets, right? We all saw our boomer mums do diet after diet, lose the weight and then gain it all back and then some. And there's obviously like this statistic that goes around, which honestly, I don't know where they get the figure from, but like they say 95% of diets fail, right? We all know of this phenomenon of like losing sometimes a fuck ton of weight. And then once the diet's over, going back to what you were doing before. And that's a really, really, really big fear for a lot of people. And something that I think that holds a lot of people back from trying to lose weight again. So I think it's really, really important to understand how to keep the weight off afterwards. It's probably a question that I get maybe the most from my clients early on in the process of like, what does maintenance look like? What does it look like after I finish this diet? Am I going to have to be on X number of calories, let's say 1,500 calories for the rest of my life? Like, am I going to just gain the weight back once I finish this diet? I think that's understandably a very big concern for people. And also my online program, where I work closely one-on-one with people to lose weight, I don't want them rebounding, right? I don't want them gaining all the weight back. I want to be able to show before and after photos. And I love hearing from clients 6 months after they've left the program, a year after they've left the program, and they've told me that they've maintained their results, or sometimes they've even improved on the results. They've lost a bit more weight or they've built more muscle. That's what I want to hear, right? I want people coming back to me saying, this changed my life, right? This made me help me lose the weight that I've always struggled to lose. It wasn't miserable. I did it without going crazy. And now I've lost the weight and I've kept it off. That's what I want to hear people say. So it's really, really important to me that people understand how maintenance works. So the first thing I think is really important to know is that your maintenance calories won't change a huge amount from starting your diet to finishing your diet. So whatever your maintenance calories are now before starting the diet, they're going to be pretty similar once you finish the diet. They might be a little bit lower. People are often really worried that, dieting ruins your metabolism and makes your metabolism go down, and then you're going to need far fewer calories to maintain your weight. That is not necessarily true, especially if you do the diet right. And by doing the diet right, you're not cutting your calories down super low. You're maintaining muscle mass while you lose body fat. So, if you lose a ton of muscle mass, if you lose 100 pounds and you lose a ton of muscle mass with that, yes, you're going to see a decrease in maintenance calories and in your BMR, but hopefully you're not going to do that. You're going to do strength training as you go along, but it's just not going to change that drastically. So that's important to know. But it's also important to know that if you go back to the exact same diet and lifestyle that you had before you dieted, you'll end up at the same weight, right? So if right now you're 10 kilos heavier than you want to be, or 100 kilos heavier than you want to be, right? Your current habits result in your current body, right? Your current body, your body fat percentage, the amount of muscle mass that you have, your body composition is the result of the cumulative habits that you've had over the past however many years. So if you just go back to those exact same habits, if you eat the way that you've been eating recently, you will just go back and you will just put the weight back on. And that's the big mistake that lots of people make. And in particular with yo-yo diets, right? Where they do a really extreme diet. Yes, they lose a ton of weight, but then they don't know anything else and they just go back to their old crappy habits. And there's nothing in between. Whereas what I teach people to do on my program is I show them a more moderate way of losing weight, which is much more sustainable, much easier, requires higher calories, and requires less hunger, like actual physiological hunger. I teach people how to do that. And then what you need to understand is that then maintenance calories, going to maintenance after you've lost the weight, means an increase in calories to come up to maintenance level, but not going all the way back to what you were doing before, right? One of the things we have to achieve on our time together on the program is that you actually have to change your habits, the type of food that you're eating, some habits that are like, obviously you're going to be eating fewer calories, but like eating at regular meal times, eating actual meals instead of snacking, eating mostly whole nutrient dense food. So 80% of your diet, flexible dieting, 80% of your diet should come from whole foods. Only 20% maximum of your calories should come from, fast food or junk food or fun food. Okay. Like nutrient poor, calorie dense foods. So if you're not sleeping enough, you have to sleep more. You have to do some kind of exercise, right? These are all habits that we need to change while you're on the diet and while you're trying to lose fat. And to some extent, you're going to need to maintain a lot of those habits for the rest of your life. And that's the idea of it, right? To change the habits so that you can maintain it for the rest of your life. There are certain things that if you just snack all day on calorie dense, nutrient poor junk food, if that's your current eating habits, you're not going to be able to just go back to that, right? You're going to need to change your habits to some of the things I mentioned before, and you're going to need to continue doing those things for the rest of your life, right? So there are certain things that you do need to do throughout the lifespan, and you can't just do for a short period of time and then you're done and then you can like go back to crappy habits. No, there are certain things you need to change. But what isn't going to stay the same is if we sort of say, okay, your maintenance calories are currently 2,000 calories. Let's get you down to 1,600 calories. You're eating a calorie restricted diet. You're in a calorie deficit. You lose the fat. You're not going to have to continue eating 1,600 calories in order to maintain your goal weight at the end of the day. You're going to be able to bring your calories up to maintenance and be able to maintain it there. Now, in order to understand a lot of the things that I'm talking about here, you need to, first of all, understand how we lose weight and how we burn energy, how we burn calories. And I have a really great podcast episode on this that I will link below that goes through exactly how we lose weight. This is really important to understand because when you understand how this process works, you don't have to just memorize random and arbitrary food rules that, any diet usually just involves cutting out all carbs, for example, or doing the Whole30. I work in a different way. I get you to understand actually how fat loss works and what levers you need to pull to get the results that you want to get. But you need to understand how fat loss works. So if you haven't, you need to listen to my podcast episode on that, how we lose fat and how it works. But just to give you a really simple summary, we burn energy through 4 different ways, right? Our basic metabolic rate, which is just keeping the lights on, keeping our heart pumping, our eyes blinking. Then there's non-exercise activity, thermogenesis, so all the moving around that we do day-to-day life. Then there's exercise, obviously. Then there's the thermic effect of food, so how many calories you burn through digestion, which basically is like when you eat more whole foods, like protein, high fiber foods, they're harder to digest. So we actually burn calories through the digestion process. When we eat very processed foods, it doesn't cost any calories or any energy for us to break them down. They're very easy for us to break down, and we don't burn any energy in the digestion. Through these 4 different ways of burning energy, this all adds up to our daily energy expenditure. Okay, so that we measure that in calories. So let's just take as an example 2,000 calories. Let's say you're burning 2,000 calories a day from these 4 different things, from movement, from your basic metabolic rate, which is going to be around 1,300, 1,400, depending on your height and things like that, from your daily movement, from your exercise, and from digestion that's measured in calories. Let's say it's 2,000 calories. In order to lose body fat, we need to get you in a calorie deficit, an energy deficit. We need to get you putting less energy into your body than you are expending. And then the body will break down your fat stores in order to make up the difference. So you'll still be burning 2,000 calories a day, but if you're eating 1,500 calories a day, your body has to burn around 500 calories a day of fat in order to give you that energy. If you do that for enough days, you'll lose body fat, right? So there's about 3,500 calories in 1 pound or half a kilo of fat. So if you create a 500 calorie deficit for 7 days, you'll burn 1 pound of fat or half a kilo of fat. Then if you need to lose 5 kilos or 10 kilos or 50 kilos, you just have to do that for enough days, enough weeks to burn enough of the body fat that you want to get rid of. And then one extra element of this is that your body can also break down muscle and other lean tissues. So that's the reason why we want it for energy, to make up that energy difference. That's why we want to do strength training, to prevent that lean tissue and muscle loss, and maybe even gain lean tissue and muscle, and ensure that all of the energy that is coming from your body stores is all coming from fat. So that's a quick summary of how you lose body fat in the first place. Now, what I want to explain is like how most people go about things. And in order to do that, I want to use something that I call Jen's Diet Difficulty Scale. And on my online program, I have like a presentation that shows this, a scale from 1 to 10, that kind of makes it easier. I think visually it's easier to see. In a podcast, you can't see this, but I'm going to try and describe it. If you took a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of difficulty, so 1 being the easiest and 10 being the hardest, what most people do, right, is they eat like an asshole. They're eating way too many calories. They're doing whatever they want. They're not thinking about how the nutrient quality. They're not making sure they're getting enough protein or vegetables. They're eating junk food. That, on a scale of 1 to 10, on Jen's Diet Difficulty Scale, that's a 1, okay? It's right down at the bottom of that scale. So maybe they're eating 2,500 calories a day when their maintenance calories are 2,000, and they're just eating whatever they want. What they then do is they do a fad diet that's like 800 calories a day, and it's fucking hard. It's like they're starving all the time. They're thinking about food all the time. They can't have any fun foods. There's really strict rules around what they can and cannot eat. This is a 10 out of 10 on Jen's Diet Difficulty Scale. So people do this. They go from a really shitty diet, shitty habits, eating way too many calories, to then going into a ridiculously low calorie deficit, cutting out a load of foods, restricting themselves around a load of things, being really, really hungry, and doing a really hardcore, full-on diet, right? So they go from 1 to 10, okay? And then once they've lost the weight, one of two things happens. Either they get a few days or a few weeks into the diet and then they give up because it's too hard, and then they go all the way back to the other side of Jen's Diet Difficulty Scale and go to a 1 and just go back to their old shitty habits, right? Just start eating, grazing, whatever, everything that they were doing before. Or they do the fad diet really strictly for like 3 months or 6 months, or it's not usually that long, but it's usually like 2 or 3 months. Get really, really, really great results, get down to their goal weight. And then they finish the diet. I'm at my goal weight. Brilliant. What do I do now? I go all the way back to the other side of the scale and just go back to my old shitty eating habits, because I can't maintain this. Like, this is way too hard. This is a 10 out of 10. This is really low calories. I can't keep eating like this for the rest of my life. It's completely unsustainable. So they swing all the way back to those old shitty crappy habits. What I try to teach my clients is a different way. So instead of doing a crazy low calorie, poverty calorie fad diet, I get them in a sensible, small calorie deficit, let's say of about 20%. Some people a bit more, some people a bit less, but around 20%. So let's say they go from eating 2,000 calories a day to 1,500 calories a day, not 800 calories a day, but 1,500 calories a day. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, on that difficulty scale of 1 to 10, this is now a 6 or a 7. It's hard, right? Trying to lose body fat is difficult. It does require effort and it does require attention. But it's a 6 or 7 out of 10. It's not a 10 out of 10 like the stupid fucking 800 calorie fad diet where you cut out carbs and sugar and anything that you enjoy. So it's much more sustainable. It's much easier than the fad diet. It's much harder than eating whatever you want and, crappy eating habits, which is a 1 out of 10, but it's not a fad diet. When you get to maintenance, okay, so when you get to your goal weight, and don't forget, this diet is going to be slower. Fat loss is going to be slower because you're not on 800 calories a day. You're on 1,500 calories a day. You get to your goal weight and then you bring your calories up to maintenance. Now, maintenance calories for you now might be 1,900. Let's say they are a bit lower than they were in the beginning. So instead of 2,000 calories a day, now you're burning 1,900 calories a day because you're carrying 30 kilos less around with you day in and day out. This isn't necessarily always going to happen because you might be more active now, you might be fitter now, you might be doing exercise, you might be doing more steps a day, you might have built muscle, right? So that often people end up on the same maintenance calories that they started, but leaving that out of it, right? Let's just simplify it. So that is after you've done a fat loss phase of 1,500 calories, this is much, much easier, okay? So it's like a 3 or a 4 out of 10. Again, it's not as easy as just doing whatever the fuck you want, right? It's not a 1 out of 10. It's not eating whatever you want all the time. Maintenance will take some work, okay? It will require you to pay attention to what you're eating, to pay attention to portion sizes, things like that. You're not going to be able to just do whatever you want. It's a 3 or a 4 out of 10 on Jen's diet difficulty scale, okay? So it's much easier than the deficit that you've been doing for the past 3-6 months, but it's harder than just going back to what you were doing before. And those habits of, eating regular meals, eating actual meals, getting the right nutrition, all of those things that we've built over the course of doing the deficit, those still apply, but now you just have more calories, like 400 calories a day more to spend. So it could be an extra 100 calories per meal, or you could have 400 calories worth of fun food or a bit of alcohol, a bit more wiggle room at the weekend. You've got more wiggle room than when you were in the fat loss phase. So that's how you want to conceptualize the diet. We're doing a much more sensible diet that's much easier, but it's going to be much harder than just doing whatever you want. And then when you get to maintenance, it's going to be much easier than the fat loss phase. This is basically the crux of what you need to understand if you are wondering how you're going to maintain your weight loss later on down the line. Again, you're not going to have to keep eating deficit calories. You're not going to have to keep eating 1,500 calories, but you just can't go back to the old crappy habits that you had before. It's somewhere in the middle, right? And it's much, much easier, but you'll also feel much, much better than the crappy habits that you had before. Something that I want to add at this point is that to some degree, you are probably going to have to work at this for the rest of your life. And keep maintaining a healthy body weight is hard and does require effort. The reason why is because of the modern food environment. We live in an obesogenic environment, which means a fattening environment, an environment that makes us fat. So we have so much availability and abundance of unhealthy, calorie-dense, highly palatable foods available all the time. Food is very, very cheap and very, very available. I know people complain about the cost of living, but it's the cheapest it's ever been in the history of the world. Way more of it. We have temptations woven into our everyday life, and this is going to vary from person to person. But if you have a family that loves to have lots of like sweet stuff and they always have cakes and stuff like that, you're going to have a harder time. If you live in America, from what I know about Americans, like you're going to have a harder time with all your drive-throughs, all of your fast food, all of the food environment that's around you. And we also live very sedentary lives. So the combination of having very calorie dense, highly processed, ultra palatable foods, an abundance of both the healthy stuff and the unhealthy stuff, and then sedentary lives. This is obesogenic. This is what we call an obesogenic environment. It makes us gain weight, and it is harder to maintain a lower weight and maintain lower body fat percentages than it is to just gradually gain weight over time. There's a lot of evidence that suggests that hunter-gatherers, which is what we were for 99% of our human history, had a body fat percentage of around 21% for women and 11% for men. They were quite lean, but they lived in a environment of scarcity, right? They didn't have much food available. There just wasn't much available. They couldn't preserve it. And if you think about the types of food that they ate, so they would have been eating red meat, fish, maybe some birds, meat from birds, maybe stealing the odd egg here and there, and some fruits that definitely don't have as much kind of the fleshy bit of the fruit that we have. It would have been much more fibrous, less sweet fruits, and some tubers, right? Then maybe there would have been some wild wheat or wild oats, but they would have been quite hard to digest. Okay, so they had much less food available. They couldn't preserve it. They had to work physically hard to get those foods, and the food that they had was difficult to digest, like the protein and all the fiber and things like that. So they had all of this meant that it was very hard for them to get calories in. The modern food environment presents the opposite problem. It's so easy to get the food that we need and to get way more calories that we need. So what we've developed throughout all of human history is a kind of a scavenging approach to food, where humans are omnivores. We can extract calories from absolutely anything, and we can eat lots of different types of foods. Whereas in the modern environment, so we had to have a sort of an attitude towards like getting anything that we can in and eating as much as we can when we get the opportunity to, eating past fullness and eating as much food as we possibly could and eating anything. Whereas in the modern food environment, that doesn't help us, and we actually need to develop discernment and decide what not to eat and what to leave off our plates and not to go back for a second helping, because there is such an abundance of food and we are wired for scarcity. So we just don't have the skills, it's not very natural to us, and to not eat food that's highly palatable and that's calorie dense. So to some extent, we will all have to work a little bit. It certainly takes effort to lose body fat, but once you get to your goal weight, it does take effort to maintain it. You have to make sure that you are relatively active, that you're not doing 2,000 steps a day. You're doing like at least 7,000 steps a day, that you are keeping moving and keeping active. We also have to do exercise because our environment doesn't, we don't run away from a lion or chase an antelope, right? We don't have those natural opportunity for exercise or challenging our bodies physically. We have to do some weight bearing exercise because we're not lifting things and moving things or doing hard physical labor that develop our muscles and bones. So we have to actually do strength training. We actually have to lift weights in order to have the sort of muscle mass that hunter-gatherers would have had just from their lifestyle. And I think this is really, really key in having the right mindset, because some people want it to be easy and think that it should be easy. And if it's not easy, then you're doing something wrong. But actually, it is hard, right? Life is hard work. And in the past, it would have been very, very hard for our hunter-gatherer ancestors to get food and to hunt animals, to gather food from the environment. And into the modern world, it is actually hard to make sure you're getting enough movement, to make sure you're getting the right kinds of foods and you're not overeating and eating too many calories. And I think the people who accept that this is a bit hard and it is going to be hard, and we do have to make an effort to lose weight, and we need to make an effort for the rest of our lives to do the things that are going to keep us healthy, they're the ones who succeed. Because everyone who wants it to be easy and doesn't want to accept the trade-offs of losing weight and keeping it off, they're the ones who gravitate back to like habits of just overeating, snacking all the time, eating the wrong kinds of foods. So accepting that it is just hard, I think, is a big part of maintaining a healthy body fat percentage throughout the lifespan. The other thing that's important to say is that I talked about how your maintenance calories probably won't change very much from beginning to end of the diet. And in some cases, they can be higher, right? So if you started the diet 15 kilos overweight, not doing any exercise, doing 3,000 steps a day, and then over the course of the diet, you increase your steps to 10,000 steps a day. You start exercising twice a week at first, and then 3 times a week. Start lifting weights. You get significantly stronger. You build a lot of muscle mass. At the end of the diet, once you've lost 15 kilos, even though you're carrying less weight around with you every day, and you will have a reduction in calorie expenditure because of that, you've offset it because you've increased your overall movement, you're doing more exercise, and you've built muscle, and also you've improved your diet quality. So all of those things cause you to burn more calories. So you could start the diet on being your maintenance calories being 1,800 calories a day. And then because you change a lot of your lifestyle throughout the 3, 4 months, 6 months of the diet, you're now burning 2,100 calories a day because you've increased your activity and muscle mass and things like that. So it's important to remember that you won't necessarily need fewer calories after the diet than you did before. That you can actually sometimes need more calories than you did before you started the diet to maintain your weight. So when you start a fat loss diet, you need to first understand how many calories you're burning, what your maintenance calories are. I go through this in the episode on how we lose fat, and that will be linked below. So you need to understand what your maintenance calories are, and then figure out what kind of calorie deficit you can tolerate. And this is normally around a 20% deficit. This is what I start with all my clients. But some people can tolerate a bigger deficit of like 30, 40%. And some people need to be in a smaller calorie deficit, especially when they get leaner. This concept is so important for understanding. Again, I won't go into any depth, but it's really important to understand that you need to first of all understand what your maintenance calories are in order to figure out what your deficit calories are. Because what most people do is they just pull a random number out of their arse. 1,200 calories is a popular one, but sometimes people do a 1,000 calorie or even 800 calorie diet, which does not take into account individual differences in maintenance calories. Some women who are very active and bigger and taller might have higher maintenance calories of 2,200 or more, and smaller women are going to have lower maintenance calories. They're going to require less energy to maintain their weight. So they might need as low as 1,600 calories if they're very inactive and only 5 foot tall. Okay, so understanding your maintenance calories is so important, because then you decide on the deficit based on that, at just a 20% deficit. For one person, a 20% deficit for somebody whose maintenance calories are only 1,600 calories. For a much bigger, more active woman, that might be 1,000 calorie deficit. That might be a 50% deficit, right? Which is going to be way too much for the individual to tolerate. So you have to figure out your deficit calories, your fat loss calories based off of your maintenance calories. So you have to know that and understand that concept first, and not just pick a random number. It's not going to be the same size for everyone. It's going to depend on your calorie expenditure. So in order to lose fat, you need to be in a sensible calorie deficit. Again, what I preach is a small calorie deficit rather than a massive one. This makes dieting easier and much more sustainable. But there's lots of other factors that go into making a diet sustainable, like, getting fullness from foods and not being hungry and managing hunger and all of that kind of stuff. You try to stick to those deficit calories for however many days, weeks, months that it takes to get to your goal weight. And once you get to your goal weight, you bring your calories back up to maintenance. And your maintenance might be the same as it was before the diet. It might be lower than it was before the diet. It might be higher than it was before the diet, depending on what you've changed as you've gone along the fat loss process, and depending on what lifestyle change you've kind of implemented, and also depending on how much weight you've lost. The way that you bring your calories up to maintenance, you can just go straight up to maintenance. So you might go from 1,500 calories and bring them all the way up to 2,000. But the more sensible way of doing it is by doing a reverse diet. So instead of just jumping straight back up to what you think your maintenance calories are, to increase your calories by 100 calories a week and monitor your weight as you do that, find your new maintenance calories and then stay there. I can talk about that in another podcast. That's basically the idea, bringing your calories back up slowly until you get to maintenance, and then eating at maintenance. This does not mean going back to what you were eating before. If you've made lifestyle changes, like you've started exercising, you start getting more active, you started eating more protein, you started eating actual filling meals, you started prioritizing healthy food, you started cutting back on the junk and things like that, you're still going to need to maintain those changes. But you will be having, an 80-20 approach to nutrition. You will be able to have some wiggle room for fun foods and for calorie dense foods. You will be able to occasionally snack or have like a glass of wine or whatever. You will be able to do those things, but the laws of thermodynamics still apply, and you still need to be making sure that you're not eating more calories than you are expending throughout the rest of your life, to make sure that you don't gain weight. But the other thing to say is that you probably will go through periods of your life where you do overeat. You go on holiday, you have like a month with loads of birthdays and stuff. You have a really stressful couple of months at work, and maybe you gain 2 or 3 kilos. You come back from your holiday, weigh yourself. Okay, like I had fun, I overate, I gained 2 kilos. Let's just nip it in the bud. Let's just cut my calories back down, do another diet phase, a fat loss phase, lose those 2 kilos. Again, sensible calorie deficit that I learned from working with Jen and doing Jen's method and stuff like that. Get down to where I feel comfortable, lose those 2 kilos, and then you bring your calories back up. So, I think a lot of people also, you kind of bury their head in the sand about this. Like, your weight will fluctuate over the years. Like, you will sometimes overdo it. And it doesn't mean you can never but the amount of damage that you can do, the amount of weight that you can lose in 2 weeks is not that much, or in a month or in a couple of months. Significant weight gain happens over many, many, many months and sometimes years. So if you just bury your head in the sand about it and like, oh, I don't want to weigh myself because I'm worried I might be up a little bit from before I went on holiday, that's the sort of thinking that's going to get you in trouble. Don't bury your head in the sand. We call that ostrich syndrome, right? But contrary to popular belief, ostriches don't actually bury their head in the sand like when they see a lion or something. Why don't they do it? Because it's a really stupid strategy. It doesn't work. They bury their head in the sand, the lion is still there and is still going to eat them. So any ostriches that did that probably would have gotten killed and not passed their genes for sticking heads in the sand on to the next generation. They wouldn't have had offspring. Whereas the ostriches that turned and run had a much better chance of survival. Just like the ostrich sticking its head in the sand isn't a good strategy, it's also not a good strategy for you to just go, I don't want to see the weight, I don't want to see the scale weight go up, I'm just not going to weigh myself. That's silly. You've still gained weight, you still weigh 2 kilos or 3 kilos more, you're just not actually looking at it on the scale. So you have to face up to the scale. I'll do another podcast on how to get back on track after you've been on holiday. That's a whole other topic. But my big message here is that you might gain weight at certain times throughout your life, and you have to just nip that in the bud, face the music, nip it in the bud, instead of burying your head in the sand and then before you know it, 2 kilos has become 10 kilos and now you've got to lose 10 kilos of body fat, which is way worse. But ultimately, maintaining your weight after the fat loss phase means bringing your calories up to your maintenance calories, your current maintenance calories, which is going to be harder to do and fewer calories than what you were eating before the diet, but it's going to be way, way easier than doing a stupid fat loss diet. And it's even going to be much, much easier than the fat loss phase itself. Okay, so like that needs to be an important part of your understanding that it is going to be easier if you've managed to lose the fat. It's going to be much, much easier to keep it off than you think. But also, learning how to lose body fat is about changing certain habits, improving your lifestyle, making sure you're eating at regular times and eating the right kinds of foods and things like that. And those sorts of habits you will have to continue to do, and exercise you'll have to continue to do for the rest of your life, right? But it will be okay because it won't be a sucky diet. You won't be hungry and you'll feel a lot better as a result of those better eating habits, rather than feeling like shit all the time because you're just grazing on crap. And of course, understanding that we live in an obesogenic environment, the modern food environment is not very conducive to being healthy, to being lean. And we do to some extent have to work at this in order to have the physique that we want and the health that we want. So you will always have to probably work, unless you're a unicorn, right? You will probably always have to work on this to some degree. but it doesn't need to be anywhere near as bad as like, what you think it is, and how it's not cutting out all sugar. It's not cutting out all carbs. It's not doing anything extreme. Again, like, you probably want to listen to one of my podcasts on what my actual approach is, that makes dieting easier. So I'll link that in below, because obviously it's possible to do if you do a really sucky diet that's like really low calories and cuts everything out. Obviously, you're not going to be able to maintain those habits for the rest of your life. But if you have sustainable, sensible lifestyle habits that you change, those are things that you are going to be able to carry on for the rest of your life. I think I've said everything that really needs to be said on this topic now, so I'm going to wrap this up. Let me know if you feel a bit clearer now on what you're going to need to do to maintain your weight, or if you still feel confused. Let me know if you have any other topics that you want me to cover in future podcasts.